This is Craig, Full Circle Compost. I want to talk to you today about making compost tea. Why would anybody want to make a tea out of compost? Well, the first and main reason is that you can put compost onto the soil, but you can't put compost onto the leaf of a plant. So the main reason to be interested in making a compost tea is to give you the ability to also put it on the plant leaf versus just putting it on the soil. Okay? Now, what makes a compost suitable to make compost tea? The most important thing about making tea is to know where your compost comes from. You want to know how that compost is made, you want to know what the recipe ingredients are, and you really want to know who makes it. Because if you get a compost that is not made correctly, you can have a pronounced negative effect on the soil, or especially when you use it as a tea on the plant leaf. So an example would be this compost that we have here today. This compost has vermicompost in it. It also is combined with thermal compost, so it has both composts in it. Most of the best teas that you find are made more from vermicompost than from thermal compost, and the reason for that is there's a pronounced increase in diversity of microbiology in a vermicompost because of the environment in which it's made. And that is something that we'll talk about in the future. You can then go to brewed aerobic teas. Today, we're going to just do a simple tea where we're going to take 2 cups of this compost and we are going to take them out, and I have a bucket full of water. This is a 5-gallon bucket, and I'm taking 2 cups of this compost and I'm putting it in the bucket. So you can see what I've done right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stir that up, and the only reason for stirring it is to get all of the particles suspended in the water so that all of the soluble nutrients that are in the compost can be unlocked, and we're going to let this sit for approximately 24 hours. I'll stir it whenever it's convenient. I leave it here close to the back door of our house, so when I walk out I can stir it, when I come back in I can stir it, and I'll probably go ahead and just lay a lid on it just so that it covers it and it'll keep it in the shade, and we're going to be in the shade here soon. So I don't really want to cook it too much. The other thing that's important when you make a tea and you think about the soluble nutrients that you have in it is that if you can find a compost like this one that has solution grade nutrients in it, you're not only going to get the benefit of the biology and whatever nutrients are in the compost, but you're going to get the benefit of the soluble nutrients that have been added to the tea mix. And that just makes it easier to make a tea. This particular one has given us very good results. The tea allows us to feed pots like this tomato in a pot behind us. We get the benefits of the nutrients without overfilling the pot. If we continue to put compost in a pot like this, eventually the pot gets full, so using a liquid, a compost tea, allows us to replace the water. The other thing about this recipe is that we've only used 2 cups in 5 gallons of water. That's going to allow us to use the tea neat or undiluted. So we're going to use this tea, and I won't use the whole 5 gallons in this pot, but what I will do is use around 2 quarts when I water this plant. Hey, this is Craig from Full Circle Compost. It's 24 hours later and we have our bucket of compost tea. And what I have is a strainer, and we will just skim a little bit of this material off the surface. But you can see that the majority of the material that we put in has either settled out, or in the case of a good compost or vermicompost, you won't have a lot of raw organic materials floating on the surface. Now, how do we use this tea? Remember, our recipe was 2 cups in 5 gallons. This tea is intended to be used strictly by itself as a plant drench, so it's as simple as taking any simple container. This is a quart bottle that was cut down, and I can apply it now to the soil. around this plant, or if I wanted to get a little bit fancier, I could take a dial and spray unit, which you can find at one of your local hardware stores. What the dial and spray allows us to do is to take some of this tea, and you want to make sure that your dial and spray has a little filter on the suction end, but we can fill this, and then we can set the dial so that it sucks up water and sprays out the tea at any desired rate that we want. Now, there's two things that can happen with a good compost tea. One is you get a miraculous diversity of biology that, when put into the potting mix, can release and unlock some nutrients that are held in that mix. It will work the same way in the soil. You get the biology which goes to work and stimulates in the root zone of the plant the nutrient availability. However, if there are no nutrients in the mix, compost teas tend not to give you as large of a benefit. That's why, again, on a material such as the one we use, we find that on the label we have solution grade calcium phosphate, we have solution grade calcium sulfate, solution grade calcium carbonate, and solution grade K-mag, which is also known as sulpomag. So what we know in this blend is that we have now got some solution calcium forms, and we have some magnesium, we have potassium, we have phosphorus. We're also going to have a fair amount of nitrogen, because this compost tests out at approximately 1% nitrogen. So when we apply that to the foliage of the plant, some of those nutrients become available through the tissue of the plant, allowing the plant to make a bigger extraction from what's in the soil. But again, we have to do our homework in both areas. Compost teas do not necessarily solve nutrient deficiencies. That's why you get varied responses. Manure teas can be a reasonably good biological stimulant for the soil. However, the most sophisticated testing instrument you have for your own health is fastened to the center of your face. It's called your nodes. If the material you use smells really bad, that's an indicator of things going on, anaerobic activity, sulfides, things that you don't necessarily want to put on the foliage of a plant. For instance, a cow defecating on a plant directly is not necessarily good for it. We also have issues with pathogens that we don't want to expose ourselves to. That's why it's nice to have a good vermicompost. The worms eat the pathogens if they are farmed correctly, and a good thermal process in our thermal compost where the heat sanitizes that compost. That's why I'm confident, because I know the source of this compost and I also know the source of the tea, so I'm not so concerned about those effects. However, I would not spray this plant when the tomatoes are ripe, and you can see there's quite a few small tomatoes. This is a sun gold. It's 60 days old. It's been in this pot. It was started in the pot in a wall of water from a 2-leaf seedling. So we're in a pretty cool climate here in the Sierras, on the eastern Sierra slope. Compost tea used foliarly and on the soil in these pots allows us to grow some really nice tomatoes in this area, because we're satisfying the nutrient deficiencies of the plant. In conclusion, we need to remember that the strength of the tea that you make determines how often you use it. If you remember, we talked about using 2 cups of this in 5 gallons. That is a weak tea, and you could use that as often as once a week as a foliar, and as often as once a week up to a gallon in this pot, replacing a portion of the water. Okay, if we were to make the tea stronger, we would then want to dilute it before you use it. That comes with some experience and some testing to see the response on the leaves. We have to remember, in this case, this bag's 9 quarts. It will allow us to make 180 gallons of a nice compost tea. Again, remembering that this particular compost contains solution grade nutrients over and above what comes naturally from the breakdown process in the vermicompost and the compost. So the real value of the compost and vermicompost is the biology, and then nutrients tend to be something that you have to identify and quantify using a soil analysis to determine what is deficient in the plant. Here you can see that there's lots of blossoms, there's lots of tomatoes, there's no blossom end rot. That's showing me the value of the calcium in this particular product. Thank you so much.